Good afternoon. My name is Niomi Drake, and I am a WLI Fellow, Class of 2020-2021. I am a personal injury attorney at Drake Injury Law.
Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Seals. I'm also a WLI Fellow, Class of 2020-2021, and I'm an attorney at Microsoft.
Rachel and I are your hosts for today's webinar. Our webinar is entitled Dismantling White Supremacy and Its Intersectional Effects, Experiences of Underrepresented Attorneys, #WeNeedYou. It is the second of a two-part series presented by the Washington Leadership Institute Class of 2020-2021. Our first webinar featured prominent attorneys who are working towards systemic changes in the state of Washington as well as nationally. Today's webinar, the second of the two-part series, will feature our own WLI fellows and will focus on their individual experiences as accomplished attorneys from underrepresented backgrounds. We will also seek to find and listen to their reflections on the first panel's commentary, and then together we will collectively discuss how we navigate the inevitable challenges of white supremacy in our legal profession and what we as a group can do to better our profession. Thank you for joining us.
And now we'd like to introduce our panelists. Nyoka Jeffrey is a native of Seattle, Washington. She graduated from the University of Washington with a Bachelor of Arts in Law, Society, and Justice, and then attended Seattle University School of Law. After graduating from law school with the Honorable Judge Mary Yu, who now sits as a justice on our Washington Supreme Court. She later clerked for Superior Court Judge Teresa Doyle. Nyoka then worked as a deputy prosecuting attorney for the King County Prosecutor's Office. As a prosecutor, Nyoka has tried many cases at the misdemeanor and felony level. We were sad to see Nyoka go, but she now currently works as the Assistant Solicitor General in the Special Victims Unit for DeKalb County in Georgia.
Our next panelist is Javier Ortiz, who we affectionately call Javi. Javi is a first-generation Guatemalan American who graduated from the University of California, Riverside with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, Law and Society, and a minor in creative writing. Javi then went on to attend Seattle University School of Law. Javi began his legal career by clerking for the Honorable Eric Lucas of the Snohomish County Superior Court. Javi then joined the family law firm Beacon Attorneys, where he primarily deals with complex divorces, parenting plans, child support modifications, adoptions, and other complex civil matters. Javi is fluent in Spanish and is committed to advocating and promoting Latinx and LGBTQ issues in Washington and across the country, as well as issues concerning people of color generally. Thank you for joining us, Javi.
James Johnson graduated from the University of Washington with a Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology, and then went on to graduate from the Seattle University School of Law. James began his legal career as a policy aide in the criminal division of the Seattle City Attorney's Office. Subsequently, he became a deputy prosecuting attorney with the King County Prosecutor's Office, where he worked in the juvenile court and felony trial unit. James then transitioned to civil practice, where he currently works on workers' compensation and third-party injury matters with Emory Reddy. James has served on the executive board for the Lauren Miller Bar Association for several years and was president for the 2020 calendar year. We're going to move on to the questions for the panelists. We want to invite all panelists to respond to the questions and share their reflections. We'll call on one person to begin the conversation, and then others can chime in if they wish. So the first question, in the first webinar, the panelists were asked how we dismantle the white supremacy written into the laws of the land, considering that the spirit of the laws never left. Panelist Sharon Sakamoto encouraged us to create change systemically by stepping up and taking our place. Have each of you felt empowered and comfortable stepping up and taking your place in this profession? If so, can you share examples of how you've done that over the years? And we'll start with Nyoka.
Thank you, Rachel. So I totally agreed with Ms. Sakamoto when she said that it's important for everyone to take their own specific place so that we can all make different change in these structures that we're a part of. I honestly, I never thought about it that way when she said it. But I agree that we each have a different place, a different role. We come from different backgrounds. We can make different change in our different roles that we have. But to answer the question, I haven't always felt empowered. Not at all. And I still struggle with feeling empowered every day. Imposter syndrome is a real thing, especially for people of color in this field. So when I first started, I definitely did not feel empowered at all. And in fact, I felt pretty scared to do anything different, to say anything different. I had seen some of the consequences of that, but over the years with different experiences, I have learned to empower myself. I've come across people in my field who have empowered me. And so I think that it's important as leaders in our field to each use our different roles to empower one another and use our roles to affect change.
To follow up with what Nyoka said, I would say it was kind of a dual progression for me. I had to grow into myself and was also empowered by others in the community to kind of step up into leadership roles and to just do other things. In particular, the Lauren Miller Bar Association. I think I developed a lot of gumption to kind of really step up and be more vocal about things and be more active from that community, which, was someone or a group, a body of people that really embraced me and let me grow into a position. And it wasn't like something that just happened overnight, because for a while I would just be quiet, still concerned about the issues, but not as vocal. They definitely gave me a platform to kind of expand or spread my wings, if you will, and tackle a lot of different issues, especially over 2020 and 2021.
And like Nyoka and James, for me, I didn't start out being super comfortable, sort of, putting myself in these positions and speaking up. I was 25 when I started practicing law. And so for me, I've kind of always been like the youngest in a room or the only person of color in a room. And what really made me kind of step up out of my shell and make sure that my voice was heard was when I was a law clerk. And you're working so closely with a judge, and it's just you and him in chambers. And when he's asking for your opinion or how you perceive a case, there's no one else in the room but you. And so if you're not speaking up, no one's speaking up. And so that kind of made me sort of make sure that my voice was heard, and it gave me the opportunity to develop what my voice was. But I mean, even then, it's still been a challenge. I currently sit on the King County Bar Association's Diversity Committee, and I was a new member, and there were a few instances where, seasoned attorneys had been on this committee for years and years, and it just felt really, not that they were doing anything intentional to, prohibit me from speaking, but I just internalized this, oh, you're new or you're a younger attorney feeling, where often I felt, maybe I can't speak, whether it's in agreement or in opposition to a point. And I remember I spoke to Justice Yu after one particular meeting, and she told me, if you're not the one sitting at the table, then someone else is going to take your position, and that person most likely is not going to have the same ideas or goals as you. And so if you choose not to speak up or choose not to sit at the table, then, your position and your value is just going to be gone. So, it's still a little bit uncomfortable sometimes to be in those positions, but I make that effort because it's true. If we're not there, we're not doing it, then no one else is going to speak for us.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to cover the next question also. In the first webinar, panelist Denise Diskin was asked about Q Law Foundation's role in dismantling white supremacy. She responded that we need to break down the assumption that attorneys are at the top of the knowledge structure. As attorneys of color and underrepresented backgrounds, what has been your experience with this assumption, and how have you handled those situations? Has your approach to such situation such situations evolved during your career? And if so, how? And let's start with James this time.
I think I learned over time, well, especially from my grandpa, that it's more prudent not to walk in assuming that you're the smartest person in the room. And I try to carry that with me in many different facets of life. And I think as attorneys, it's very true. We're not always the top knowledge base because, to an extent, we are removed from community or live in separate worlds, from our day to day. So may not be as in tune with some of the things that other people are experiencing. And you literally can't be everywhere at once. So how could you be informed about everything? And I think another part of what Denise was saying is that you've got, these social groups that are literally doing a lot of these different things and then sharing information. And so, the community approach or collective knowledge is stronger than just one individual trying to know everything at once.
Yeah, I love Denise's statements because I think as lawyers, we're kind of, especially attorneys of color, when we become attorneys and our community members look to us as sort of these new leaders in the community because of the education and the titles we've received. But it's so true. I think it narrows the perspective of what it means to be a lawyer and a leader. Through the course of the WLI, we've learned different leadership styles. You're not necessarily always going to have to be the commander, the first person in line to make the decisions. And sometimes, a leadership style where you're collaborating or you're encouraging other community members to speak up and voice their opinions and, for them to take the charge is often the better outcome. And so I think for lawyers and especially, young attorneys of color, when we're kind of put into these leadership or community leadership positions just by, there's not a lot of attorneys of color. So when we get them, we kind of, oh, they're these beacons or they're, going to be good sources of wisdom, which isn't to say we're not, but I think to recognize that just because we're attorneys doesn't mean that other people can't be leaders when they're in the same room with us. And, depending on the situation, I think we as attorneys need to work on sort of assessing, is this a moment where I need to step back? Are there other experts in the room that know more than I do just because of the nature of their work? Maybe they're, like James was saying, other community organizations that are already doing the day-to-day work on this. And I'm just coming in sort of observing from the bird's eye view. So I think learning to be an attorney and sort of figuring out different leadership styles that can work is a goal that we should all have.
And so I totally agree. I think Denise said that there's an inherent power in our community, and that was powerful to me. I feel like only the people within the community can kind of say what's best for them. And I feel like as attorneys, there's kind of an assumption that we know what's best for you, especially in prosecution. And I honestly think that there's not enough accountability with people, I'll just speak specifically for prosecutors, when our decisions that we make directly affect communities that honestly most prosecutors don't even live in, but when I was in Seattle, I lived in the South End. So I could see somebody and have a case with them or one of their family members, and then I could see their family at my son's basketball game. So there was an accountability there that made me think twice about the things that I did with each case or in a bond hearing, because I knew, I have to answer to my community about these decisions that I make. So I think that it's important for us to remember that we do this, what we do affects other people, and that we have to remember that we have an accountability for those things that we do.
If I could say one more thing, I think there's a large misconception about attorneys that we know everything because we're attorneys. But even if you just look at the people on this screen, we've got personal injury, Microsoft, workers' compensation, family law, prosecution. We're usually hyper-focused on one thing, and we know that really well. So, it's almost naive or ignorant to walk in thinking that you just know everything about everything, because you don't.
Very true. Very powerful reflections. I'd like to start with Nyoka on this next question. And in the first webinar, panelist Twyla Carter was asked about advice that she had for young women of color who want to go to law school. She said, know yourself and accept that you'll experience and see white supremacy, microaggressions, and white guilt in the legal profession. What was your reaction to Twyla's advice, and did it resonate with you? Also, when you're answering this question, think about how does her insight align with your own personal experience as a female attorney of color?
So I absolutely agree with Twyla. I think when I first became an attorney, I was just excited. I was like, I'm an attorney. I'm a part of this group of people. You feel like you're a part of like an elite group of people because now you're an attorney. But I think you soon find out that even though you're an attorney, if you're a part of kind of a marginalized group, you're just seen as different. It doesn't matter. We all went to law school. I can have the same experience as every attorney in the room and even the judge on the bench, but I will be treated just a little bit differently. I can't tell you how many times people come into the courtroom and walk past me and say, where's the prosecutor? And it's like, there's a concept that it can't be her for some reason. So I think that Twyla's advice that to just always be yourself, to be who you are, and without shame, and come in here knowing who you are into this field and maintain that, I feel like that is essential. And I feel like that's the only way you can kind of get through and be successful in this field is if you stick to your own morals and stick to who you are. She also said something that really resonated with me. She talked about how certain white people that you work with can kind of have white guilt. And so you can't really depend on their advice and what they say to you. And that is true. I didn't even think about it until she said it, but it is true. And I think the way that I've been able to maintain being in this field is I have like undoubtedly relied on my village. I have a village of people that I call on, that I trust, that I know they will look at me and say, Nyoka, no, or Nyoka, yes. But they'll be honest with me, and I know I can ask them for their honest opinion, and I know that I can depend on them when I'm having a hard day, which sometimes it's hard weeks. So I think that that's really important to build your village, to have people around you that believe in you, that you can count on, that you can talk to, because you will need somebody to talk to. I think as a Black woman, we have to be able to kind of shut out, I guess you call it white noise, and be able to focus on what we're doing and just depend on the people that we know believe in us, who surround us.
I'd like to open that question up to Javier and James for your reflections on that and how that aligned with your own personal experiences. Let's start with Javier.
Sure. I mean, I completely agree with Twyla. I also completely agree with Nyoka. Obviously, my experiences are completely different, as a male versus, what a female attorney has to go through. But a lot of the stuff that I've felt either as, a Latinx or Latino attorney or a gay attorney, like the biggest things for me are sticking to who I am and making sure that, I'm not wavering or, making myself less than to appease, this white heteronormative majority that exists in our profession. And for me, I think the biggest microaggressions that I always come across are with my name. Javier Ortiz. I mean, I know for a lot of people in America, it seems like, I'll get commented like, oh, that's such a pretty name, or like, oh, that's so exotic. And I tell them like, it's a common name. It's basically the equivalent of like John Smith, like in an English world, like they're like, I'm a junior, I'm named after my dad, but I'll go to court and it could be opposing counsel, it could be the judge, and there'll always be a hesitation before my name is said. Or sometimes I'll get a commissioner that'll say Mr. Ortiz because they don't want to say my first name, but then they'll call opposing counsel by their first name. And it's kind of one of those feelings where I always feel like the other, like no matter what I'm doing, I'm kind of not part of that community because of a name, something that I can't control, right? And there was a point where, I would be like, oh, well, let me try to figure out how I can make my name easier to pronounce or just ignore it. if someone mispronounces my name in court, let it go. Let me not correct them because I don't want to put more attention to that. And I realized that, by doing that, like I wasn't being true to myself, right? Like I love my name and it's who I am. And so, I'll find myself correcting people. And even if it like makes them uncomfortable, because the thing is, like, if I'm not correcting them with my name, then they might be mispronouncing other people's names, either intentionally or unintentionally. And, someone's name is just like the basic concept of their identity. And so for me, it seems like the world's smallest battle or war to keep waging, but I always work to correct people with my name because we work so hard to remember these great figures and these great attorneys, and making sure that we pronounce their names properly, or their pronouns properly. And if I can't accept that for myself, then what am I doing to the people that come after me or the people that work in my profession as they do? Just like Nyoka, though, I've had moments where court staff will walk past me and be like, "Oh, you're the attorney?" Or like, "Oh, do you need assistance? Like, do we need to contact an attorney for you?" And it's like, you've seen me in court a few times, at least once or twice, actually arguing before the court and introducing myself as counsel. And so it's always disheartening, but I know that, if I do my best and like I stick to who I am and making sure that other people know who I am, that, that's what matters to me. I'm not going to let someone else take away my light, because I've worked hard to get here. Others like me have worked hard to get here. Everyone on the panel one worked hard to get here. And so, we got to make ourselves heard and known, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
Just kind of latching onto the theme of identity or just kind of different issues or interactions with the court, I could kind of share a couple of experiences that I've had. And I do that to say that it's not only, white individuals that will do this. And I use that preface to say that when I was a prosecutor, I had a Black attorney come up to me, and before I did a plea calendar, where it's literally, I'm just a talking head, I had nothing to do with this case, comes up to me and is like, "You should be ashamed of yourself for putting Black people away." And I think I'm 1 or 2 years, out of law school. Like, what are you talking about? And it was someone I respected. Another incident I've had is a judge that I was before just one day prior. I was in court the next day, just observing, kind of dressed how I am right now, not in a blazer, but with a button up, normal. And the bailiff came up to me and it's like, "Hey, are you here for your calendar? Are you here for your hearing?" And I'm like, "Nope." And that's how I left it at that. And then while the judge was in the middle of another proceeding, stopped that proceeding to tell me to go check in for my case, even though I'm amongst a group of 4 or 5 other people who are all prosecutors, but they only singled me out. And the kind of third incident I dealt with was at trial. A defendant commented to me that if I'm guilty of this crime, so are you, based on these facts. So what are you going to do? You have to carry that weight with a lot of different things. And it took time and thick skin to get through it. And it's something I reflected on. And one of the reasons I ultimately left prosecution is I didn't want to bear that burden anymore, because it's hard. And I applaud the individuals that do that work, because it's hard work. And just like Nyoka said, seeing people in the community, had that happen too. Had someone on trial, saw them out at dinner one night, and they looked at me and I looked at them, and we kept it pushing. But that's a reality that you live with. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't go be in these positions, because we do need people like us and like those out there that are coming up, because without those shared or lived experiences, the system would be the status quo of what it always has been, and it would never change. That's not what we want. We want transformation.
That's right. Thank you for sharing your personal experiences. Now we want to pivot and talk about a time where, so throughout our time as fellows, right, we heard from many practitioners about how they were the only lonely, or the lonely only. Have any of you experienced this? And has there ever been a time in your work as an attorney where you became overwhelmed or tired from the task of being a person of color in that profession? And you guys gave some examples of that just now. But what I want to focus on is, did you ever consider giving up when you felt these feelings? And if so, how did you overcome them? And we'll start with Nyoka on this.
Yes, I have had many times where I'm like, I can't do this. am I supposed to be doing this? I think the hardest time was probably last summer when all the protests were going on. And every prosecutor I knew who I was close with, we all had to like really think about what we were doing and if we were doing the right thing. Are we a part of this problem? But like Javi said, I think about if I leave, who's gonna be here? If I leave, there's been so many times where I'm literally the only person in the room when we're talking about a case or a motion or whatever who notices something that's so obvious to me. But everybody is they're oblivious to the ways that different communities live. And so I feel like if my voice is not here, whose voice is going to be here? Who is going to replace me? And what will they say and what will they do? And so I've definitely felt alone many times. I've definitely had times where I wanted to give up, but that is what keeps me doing the work that I'm doing, at least for now, is that I know that I'm needed. Someone with my experiences is needed in this role. It's like imperative to have more Black people, especially Black women, who are able to look at cases, come up with different outcomes for people. And if I'm not here, it just may not happen. The easy thing to do is to just give somebody some time. That's the easy thing to do. The hard thing to do is to try to find a different outcome. So yes, I've wanted to give up, but I'm still here.
Say similar to Nyoka, I had some feelings last summer surrounding George Floyd's murder and things that kind of happened or didn't happen in terms of people speaking up. And some of the feedback I got was like, I was wondering what took you so long to speak up. And I was like, well, why do I always have to be the person to kick off the initiative, right? That gets tiring too, because I think it was Jeff Robinson was talking about, who do you want to be when you come into a courtroom, and like what kind of person you're going to be. And that carries into the workplace too. Do you want to be that person that's always, speaking up and saying, hey, well, you need to do this, or here's the Black angle on it. And then that has its own kind of, myriad of things that come with it. It's like, here we go again, we got to hear the Black perspective, but you do, right? To an extent, you need to hear that because you're not thinking about something that I'm thinking, just like I'm not thinking about the ways you look at things. But yeah, that gets tiring and you don't want to be it. I mean, I wish I had something more intelligent to say, but it just gets tiring.
I agree with both Nyoka and James. I mean, I have been the lonely only so often, whether it's the only brown person in the room or the only gay kid in the room or the only person that speaks Spanish. It gets tiring, especially, in regards to when I am the only one in my office who speaks Spanish and we are, 2 blocks away from El Centro de la Raza. And that means, living in North Beacon Hill, there's a lot of Spanish speaking people in the neighborhood. And oftentimes, I'm walking from the light rail to the office and they'll see me and they'll have questions, or they'll call the office because they see the sign and, they'll try to get an intake. And since no one else knows Spanish, I have to do, even though our staff on every other case would normally do an intake, I have to do the intake, and I also have to do the consult and, draft letters in Spanish to the client so that they can understand, but then also draft them in English because, I can't just easily Google Translate things because some words just won't translate properly. And so I have to basically do everything twice by myself because no one else here can. And so it oftentimes it feels this weight on me, like, I have to do it all. And if I can't, if I don't do it, then who else is gonna do it? But I share Nyoka's sentiment, like, well, if I'm not doing it, like, who else would be here? Would it be someone who would speak Spanish and not have different views for the clients, or maybe, speak Spanish and not want to take these particular cases, or not speak Spanish, right? That they hired a different associate. But it's rough. And it also, like James was saying, this feeling of, having to, when you're the lonely only, having to speak about like the perspective, whether you're the brown perspective or the gay perspective, or people just like look to you if there's an issue that's LGBT or BIPOC related, like, oh, well, we're just going to wait for you to say what you're going to say. And it's like, why do I have to do that? You know, I can be just as misinformed or not knowing as everyone else. I think right before this call, we were talking about the transition between, from Latino, Latina, and then to Latinx and that discussion. And there was a point in my time where I hadn't made the transition yet, or I wasn't understanding. And I'm a person of color, right? And I am Latino. And, I feel like to some people, they would have been shocked that they were like, you don't have an opinion on this, or you haven't been reading this. I'm like, no, like I live my life just as much as you do. Like, I'll read the same articles you most likely do. And so it's just this feeling, and I think it goes back to this feeling of expertise that we just think lawyers have. And I think it's so much more of a burden when you're the only one of your kind in the work setting that has to speak on that. And I've thought of giving up, right? It's kind of one of those, like, why do I have to do it? And it's not necessarily like the work, but it's just the perspective that you have to bring. And I oftentimes just speak to people who aren't lawyers, right? I want people who are doing similar experiences in the different professions. And it kind of reminds me why I'm still in the law, right? Because again, I think it goes back to, if I'm not here, who else is going to take my spot? And, they're definitely not going to have the same experiences and background as I have. And so if I want what's best for my community, what's best for my profession, and what's best for my clients, then, making sure that I take care of myself and making sure that I talk to others, but still, stick through it is so important. And over time, work to make sure I'm not the only one, right? Make sure that I'm reaching out to my community and grabbing those members and be like, hey, you're also Spanish speaking, you can be an attorney too, or that's super important. So, I think while it's tiring, I think it also just puts fuel under my fire to be like, I don't want to be the only one. So like, let's get out there and let's get people like me here so that we can all be doing the work together.
In the first webinar, the panelists were asked about the role of allyship in dismantling white supremacy in the profession. Panelist Jeffrey Robinson said that following the riot at the US Capitol on January 6th, now is the best time to come into the legal profession and create change. What does allyship mean to each of you? And how do you personally approach allyship, whether in trying to gain an ally or trying to be an ally? And we'll start with Javi on this question.
Sure. I think Jeffrey was right. I think this is the best time to come into the profession. But allyship to me, especially, for myself, again, I still recognize that even though, I might be underrepresented when it comes to LGBT or, Hispanic or Latino identity, I still am a male. And so that means that I'm not going to have the same experiences as my female attorney counterparts. And so I need to work not only in making sure that my, goals and my community gets represented, but also being an ally for female attorneys. Because, I've been in the room where, it's 3 men and 1 female attorney, and that female attorney always gets asked their opinion last, or sometimes not asked. Or I've been in situations where, we have a male partner at the firm and a female partner at the firm. And I've had situations where I've worked diligently with the female partner and I've explained to the client, the position and where we're going with their case. And they'll be like, no, I want to hear from the male partner. Like, what is their perspective? And like the 2 partners, they work collaboratively together. So like, when one of them makes the call on how the case is going, that's how the case is going. And like in those situations, like I affirm, like, no, she's read your case. She's read all the details. This is what she looked at. Like, this is her experience and her understanding. And like, this is how we're proceeding. And so for me, it's working in order to, make sure that, my female counterparts get acknowledged, they're my colleagues. And so letting them have the room and recognizing what situations I should be talking about and I shouldn't be talking about, right? I think that's important to, as an ally, regardless of, which movement or which group you're supporting, because sometimes, your role or your duty as an ally, you're not needed to speak, right? If we're talking about, issues that women have faced in the workplace, well, I can talk about like, well, yeah, I saw my female colleague and this what happened to her. It's like, well, instead of me talking about what she experienced, why don't I just see if she wants to talk about her own experience? And because I'm not going to have that perspective, I'm not going to know what the internalized feeling that she had at the time was. But I think after January 6th and like this whole wave of misinformation and disinformation and people being silenced, the attack on the Capitol, it's so important now to be an ally and to, provide support for those groups to make sure that those voices are getting heard.
For me, allyship means continued effort over time to continue the cause or, further the mission. And what I mean by that is that, you can do a one-off, you can wear a t-shirt or put up a sign or go to one march, but then what do you do next year? And can I count on you in the future when you're all alone by yourself? Do you need the strength of numbers to go ahead and speak up and say something? And you don't necessarily have to, be pounding the pavement every time. Like, what can you do to assist? And everybody has different talents and everybody's not going to do the same thing. But, just like a community, it takes all of us to make this community run. So it's going to take all of us to, make change and make real change. I think Twyla was talking about, the bare minimum of, is just being a good person and, being self-conscious about what's going on. And that's the bare minimum and almost the expectation of what's going on now. But, what else can you do? And can you give a little more? And kind of circling back to the lonely only, the reason why, I've stayed in whatever position it was, and I've continued to march on and do things, because what if the people 10, 20, 100 years ago, they just stopped? They said, nah, this is enough. I'm comfortable with this situation. Then where would we be? We literally wouldn't be here talking, having this conversation, right? So at some point, it's like, do I have the audacity to stop now? And knowing that I have two young sons that are going to grow up in a different world, hopefully. And did I, stay on the sidelines, or did I try to be active and do something about it? And I try not to live with regret. So I would try to, or I would rather know that I did something than nothing at all.
So I totally agree with Javi and James. I feel like allyship is super important. I think that there was a shift with this last election. I think that there were a lot of people in this country who maybe felt like they were allies before and realized maybe they weren't, or realized they needed to do more. I think that a lot of people woke up this past year, and allyship was a huge part of why this election ended up the way that it did. Allyship was a huge part of all the protests. It had a huge part in the outcome of the George Floyd trial. I think it's a crucial part of making change. And I think Mr. Robinson said that in the first panel. I think that, different marginalized groups have been marching for a long time, just out here trying to make things happen on their own. And we're not going to stop doing that. But I do feel like with more people, with everybody working together, we can effectuate change much more quickly. We can be much more powerful. And I think that I had to also think about myself as an ally, especially this year with a lot of the other hate crimes that were going on, especially like in the Asian community. When that was happening, I was like, oh, wow, I really need to hold down that community the same way that I expect for them to hold me down and my community down when things are going down in our community. So I had to look at myself and say, okay, well, now it's your turn to be an ally. You need to get out there and make sure that you're supporting that community. But hopefully one day there won't be a need for that term. We won't even need to say who's an ally and who's not. Hopefully we can all see something is wrong. We can notice that something is wrong, and we can all know that it's our responsibility to do something about it.
Thank you. How do each of you work towards dismantling white supremacy in the legal profession? And what methods have you found to be most impactful in that effort? We'll start with James.
I'd probably say the easiest thing I do is being vocal when I see it or when it happens. And even some of the experiences that I shared with you, I wasn't very vocal at the time, and that's something I regretted, and it changed me for the better. Because for whatever reason, honestly, I was like, I don't want to deal with this situation right now. I don't want to be that person. But as part of the maturation process, you realize you got to call it out now, or otherwise you kind of missed your boat. And it's too late. It doesn't have the same effect. And that doesn't mean you have to be all rah in someone's face, but you know how to speak up and say something. And I think that's the easiest thing that I do. Other things that I do is I try to engage in different type of talks and community groups and different efforts under my LMBA umbrella, and other things that I do alongside with my wife in the community, just to try to go out and support. And then, like kind of Nyoka's point, support others, because you can't always just ask for help. You got to give it too. Otherwise, there's no reciprocity in that relationship. And I don't want to be that person. It's just a taker.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm just gonna say just existing, right? Every time I sign my name on a pleading and submit it to the court, that is, white supremacy as an institution and a crippling force in this country would have me as a gay, brown, poor attorney not be an attorney, right? This kid wouldn't have had the possibility to wear a suit, go to court and, say, Your Honor, call myself Mr. Ortiz and sign a WSBA number. The fact that I choose every single day to keep doing what I'm doing is part of tackling white supremacy, because there are attorneys out there who will look at me and, regardless of whether I win a motion or don't win a motion, will look at me and be like, well, you don't deserve to be an attorney just based on how you look or how you identify. And so, as James is saying, being vocal, but also just being present, put yourself in those positions, because visibly when we're in those positions and we're in those rooms, just by our appearances alone, people start to look like, hey, maybe I can do that as well. Or, hey, maybe, I thought being a lawyer was just being, an old fart, stiff individual. Like, no, change what it means to be an attorney. And I think for me, I actually, COVID has been an awful time, but there was a blessing that came in it when we had to shift from being traditional attorneys and going to court and figuring out how are we still attorneys from a remote perspective. And I took this time to have a journey of self-reflection of like, what does it mean to me to be an attorney? And during this time, I've grown out my hair. I took a picture on Instagram where I was rocking a red blazer, something that I wouldn't normally do. And I hope that I can go to court one day, once it's all open, and wear that, wear a blazer, wear a red suit, change this idea of what it means to be a male attorney, what it means to be an attorney, because, just the visibility in and of itself has other people doing the same, right? When we think of, how can I dismantle white supremacy? A lot of the work is in educating people and, putting people in positions of power that can overturn laws and, change the shape of how our country and our legal system work. But it also is just the visibility. And that's where it starts, when people can see people of different sexualities or gender identities or, skin tones or nationalities, or, people who are able-bodied or not able-bodied or different, mental capacities, being attorneys and succeeding and thriving or making mistakes and doing all that we do. That is the work of dismantling white supremacy. And so getting to do these panels and getting to talk to people and sharing our stories, I mean, that's a part of it, and I love it.
So I agree. I think being visible and being vocal are, those two things alone help to dismantle white supremacy. But what I try to do every day in the work that I do is to always do what I think is the right thing to do. And that sounds so easy, but it's really hard, because sometimes what you think is the right thing to do is not what you're supposed to do, or it's not what everybody else is doing. Or, if I see a flaw in something, to point it out, to call it out, even if that means that, I may get in trouble or people may have an opinion about me. If we're in a meeting and someone says something that's dumb or ignorant, I have to say, you just said something dumb and ignorant. Even though I don't feel like it, even though I just want to be in this meeting and be texting on my phone, no, now I have to, I have to do it. And that can be exhausting and stressful. But I try to make it a point to just keep doing what I think is right, always, every day, even though I'm tired and it can be really hard. That's what I try to do personally to try to dismantle white supremacy.
Our project is subtitled #WeNeedYou. Considering your individual backgrounds and experiences after hearing from the panelists in the first webinar, what advice would each of you give to law students and new attorneys of color from underrepresented backgrounds entering the legal profession? And then also, how do you think your specific backgrounds or upbringings influence the way that you practice law? And you guys kind of hit on the second topic already. We'll start with Nyoka.
So I would just tell all those people who are considering being attorneys that we need you. Like, please come. But I would just encourage them that it's not gonna be easy. But it's worth it. And Jeffrey Robinson said something so awesome in the first panel. He was like, he said confidence is overrated. And most of the things he does, he was like, I'm scared to death every time I go in a courtroom. And I'm the same way. It doesn't matter how many times I've given an opening statement. I'm still scared as hell when I do it. When I start a trial, I'm still scared. So it's kind of that same thing. Like, if it's something that you're passionate about, if you know that there's some change that you can make, if there's something that you know that you can do and you can get done, then we need you to do it. We need people of all different backgrounds to bring the one thing that you think that people know, something that you may have grown up with every single day. I promise you, there are so many people in this field who have no idea about the things that you may have experienced as a kid or grew up with in your community. We need all walks of life in this field. And I think once we get more people who are just so different, it's really going to change the legal field. So I would just encourage them to do it anyway.
I agree with Nyoka. I also, regardless of what I do, will get like an upset stomach or like dry cotton mouth. And I'm just like, oh, it could be the third hearing in a day. And I'm still just like, well, it's first, it feels like the first time every time. But one thing, that I want to encourage people to join is, Jeffrey Robinson was saying in the first panel, this idea of being the first, first Hispanic attorney or first LGBT attorney or first female attorney, and not liking the title or the label of the first, because the reality is, that, it puts into perspective all the other people that didn't come before. And in order for us to stop being the firsts, there has to be a second and a third and more people coming in. And that doesn't happen until people like us or people not like us get into the profession. And it's going to be hard. And, I have every single day a thought like, do I still want to be an attorney? Like, what if I just take a 6-month sabbatical and I decide to be a painter, and then I'm like, you know what, I don't want to come back, I'm just gonna go paint, and I'm gonna own a yacht in Italy, and that's what I'm gonna do with the rest of my life. But I think in those moments, it's when I feel like I have to be in a box of what it means to be an attorney. And I then like take a moment, usually I'll go home and I'll start writing or doodling something. And I realized that the reason why I became an attorney and what I do is because there's such magic and such creativity in being a lawyer. As Rachel was saying, Rachel and Niomi were saying at the beginning, I minored in creative writing. And so a lot of my background is storytelling and drafting these things. And it influences in how I practice being a lawyer, because I like to think of the most creative solutions for my clients. And being a family law attorney, I have a lot of wiggle room when I go to mediation. Like, what are we going to do to get these people divorced? And how can we creatively, concoct a solution that's going to, set these two people up for a good life after they're no longer married? And I think, for people going into this, just recognize that being a lawyer and having a JD, or if you don't want to be a practicing lawyer, is what you make of it. I think recognizing that the more diverse voices come into the profession, the more diverse use comes into being a lawyer and having a JD, and just recognizing that you're going to make it whatever you want it to be. You're going to be as creative or non-creative, or as aggressive or not aggressive, but you need to get in there, you need to do the work, because that's what's going to change our profession and shape it to reflect society.
I would say we need you so that we don't become extinct. First and foremost, we've worked hard to get to this point, and if no one comes up to follow, you'll run out. And really want a diverse profession that reflects the community. And it's not just the same groups or the same people over time holding these positions. Going into law school, one thing that I really struggled with and grew into again on day one was I want to remain who I am, and I want to carry that through my practice. I don't want to, overtly just change for everybody and conform to the idea of what an attorney is supposed to be, right? One thing I do, I like to have some fun, crack jokes. And like, one thing that was weird to people when I first came in the office was I would say good morning to everyone. Like, what is the issue with that? That's nothing aggressive. That's nothing strange. It's just, hey, how you doing? We work together. We're here 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and I can't say good morning, but everybody's head down. So, I just want to inject some kind of life into a legal profession, which is traditionally very mundane, stale, and boring. It doesn't need to be. As Javi's pointing out, that there can be a lot of creativity in the law, the legal profession, and the legal profession isn't just confined to traditional roles that you hear about, like that we're doing. There's people doing stuff I've never even thought or heard of and didn't know about it until I got into this world. But it's, in some regards, almost like a secret society until you get in, but you don't know what you know. And that's part of the reason why we're here and doing this, is to try to, lift that veil and show you that, one, it's possible, two, you can do it. And, we need you because you're talented, and lend those talents to this profession for overall change, which is what we're trying to do.
Okay, so on the flip side, what suggestions would you offer to law students and new attorneys who find themselves in the majority or a dominant demographic as they think about what they can do to dismantle white supremacy in the profession?
Yeah, I think as we were talking about earlier about allyship, I think, recognizing the role that you have, me, as I was, as I mentioned earlier, being a male attorney and letting my female colleagues speak about their experiences. So learning how to engage in opportunities where you might be taking a step back. I think, another important thing is to not assume that the person, whether, if it's a racial issue, that, the only Black person or the only brown person in the room has an expertise voice on the opinion. I think we inherently think, oh, if it's a female issue, the female attorney is going to have an opinion on this. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. I think, again, we all are just normal, regular people. But I think the biggest thing is to just, I think this goes for everyone, but, especially if you're in, a more dominant group, just check yourself, make sure that you're doing the work. I think James said earlier, you're not just doing one event and you're like, bye, but you're actively doing the work of being an ally and educating yourself on issues and, talking with people and feeling uncomfortable in all of it. We as people of color or marginalized groups, we feel uncomfortable in these situations sometimes when we're placed in them. But if you're in the dominant group, also get the feeling of being uncomfortable, because that means growth. And that means if you're growing, then you're doing something, and hopefully you're doing positive work to help marginalized groups grow and be visible in the community.
So I would just say that, the days of not having to recognize your privilege and your bias, like those days are over. So you have to recognize privilege if you have it, and be able to, like Javi said, check it and understand what that means, what that brings, the dynamic that brings to this field, the power that you hold. But knowing that you have privilege, recognizing that, and knowing that everybody else is recognizes it now, and we're pointing it out, and we understand that there's implicit bias. And so being able to just check that at the door, and do good work.
I'd say being open to grow and continue to learn. I think that's been prefaced here. And also, even if you're part of the majority, you are still an individual. And I say that in the sense that you have different skill sets. So, how can you lend your talents to help others? Maybe you can help a grassroots organization by, I don't know, designing a flyer. Maybe you can donate. Maybe you can door knock. I don't know, but figure out what you can do to help, and don't just be complacent in whatever reality you want to make for yourself. Kind of step out of the comfort zone, like we're talking about here. Eyes wide open, and see what you can do. Because really, if you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem on a very basic level.
Thank you. Lastly, we know that having joy is a form of resistance to white supremacy. What things do you find joy in? And we'll start with James.
Joy. I definitely get joy from my family, my kids, music. I like watching my movies. That's great. But I do find joy in knowing that I've grown and I'm trying to do something, and I'm not just sitting back. And hopefully that, my message or word will touch someone, even if it's just one, to do something different. There's joy in that. And also that we're in a different time than we were just a year ago. And knowing that, people are working together. I mean, I still reflect on going through the marches and the protests. It was crazy to see that happen. Never thought I would see something like that in my life. I think back to the civil rights in the 60s, those movements. And so I have joy in knowing that, we are changing and we continue to evolve as people and a community.
Joy. I mean, that's depending on what day you ask me, joy might be a little difficult to find. But I think for me, just on a personal day-to-day, I love baking so much. Half of it because of the food, clearly, but the other half is just the smell and sort of this idea that I can take, 12 ingredients and make something that's completely different. And you can see, sometimes when you're a lawyer and, change is slow, you're just like, is this ever gonna happen? And so for me, baking is sort of like a microcosm of what I do as a lawyer, and I get to see a final result. And so just, it's weird, and it like reminds me while I'm eating the cookie, like, hey, you're gonna get a great result at some point in this. But I think, James mentioned something earlier about, us being part of like a secret society sort of thing as lawyers. And I didn't think about that until you said it, and I totally agree. I love being an attorney and just the work and impact laws and attorneys and judges have in our country. And I will always forever remember the summer that the Supreme Court ruled on same-sex marriage. And I got to be in DC that summer. And I actually lived like 2 or 3 blocks away from the Supreme Court. And that day, it was just people were in the streets. Everything was closed. Like, it was wild. And you recognize that as an attorney, you get to be part of this group where your work will impact and have a ripple effect that can change this whole country. And it does, you don't think of it when you're kind of sitting in these things, how much power that is and how much change that can bring. But in those moments when I think about those events, it feels so special to be able to do and be able to be a part of, a secret society that gets to do that. And, you don't get to say that every day, that, you get to have this cool superpower sort of situation going on. But I think the final thing that really brings me joy is having conversations, getting to talk about these issues, and getting to talk to future people who are eager or nervous or questioning to take the same path that I did or a similar path to what I took. And I always remember, before I became a law clerk, I was a recruiter for a law school. So actually, I just finished the bar and just finished law school. So now for like months, I had to convince people like, hey, law school's a great idea for you. You're going to have super fun, like so much fun, like come and join. The 3 years are going to be great. Like there's no tears. What are you talking about? And in that time, I actually, getting to talk to people about like the impact that law school had on me, and the struggles and celebrations I had in law school, made me reflect on my time as a law student, be like, it was a great time. Like, sure, it had its downs, but the ups made it so worthwhile. And I passed the bar and here I am. And so getting to talk about the challenges and obstacles and ups and downs that I get to practice, have as a young attorney of color, I sit back on it and I'm so excited that even though I have a burden and even though it gets tiring, it's so much fun to be able to talk about that there was a day I didn't think I was ever going to be an attorney, and I've been doing it for like 5 years. And so, if I can share these stories and have other people end up having similar stories to me, that just brings me so much joy.
So my joy definitely comes from my family, without a doubt. They are my safe place. I love to travel, but my true joy is with my family. I have 2 boys. I can be having a horrible day, but my little one, there's no way I cannot smile coming home to him. So that's my joy in my personal life. In my work, I find joy when I'm able to come up with an alternative to someone going to prison, when I'm able to craft a solution that not only can change this person's life, but will probably change the lives of the generations to come after that person, because they're able to get treatment or whatever they need instead of going away. I also find joy, probably my favorite part of my job, and what helps me to keep going, especially when I have hard cases and hard trials, is when I'm able to tell a victim that you're safe, that it's over. You didn't come in and testify for no reason. You can go home, you're safe, or your child is safe. That gives me the greatest joy in my profession. But being able to kind of see the change, that all the hard work that I do, to see the outcome and see the difference that it makes in people's lives, that truly brings me joy.
Well, that wraps up our webinar today. We want to thank all of the panelists for your reflections, for your candid sharing of your personal experiences. And we hope to everyone who's watching that you find this helpful, and that you join us in the legal profession to help us fight the good fight.